Hello, I'm Stephen Wynn, arts writer and critic in San Francisco. We're here today to speak to the four leading candidates for mayor about the arts: Angela Alioto, London Breed, Jane Kim, and Mark Leno. We're going to speak to them first about their own experience of the arts, what has been important and inspiring to them. Then we'll move on to talk about how the arts can be supported and nurtured in San Francisco, how they are to be funded, and finally what the role of the public schools in the arts are. Angela Alioto, thank you very much for joining us today to talk about the arts.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
The arts, I love the arts.
Great, excellent, a great lead-in. Let's talk first about your own experience of the arts. Something or some things recently that have been important to you that you've seen in a museum, a performance, a book, something that you've seen on television that was motivating or moving or inspiring to you.
Well, first of all, Steve, I am an art history fanatic. I'm an art history student. My major in college was art history and Dante, Italian literature. I live in Italy during the summers. I'm a fanatic from Cimabue to Caravaggio, which would be the 1300s to 1610. I just built the little chapel in the heart of North Beach that's got Perugino's and Ilario di Viterbo. And this is Renaissance art that you can see from the street. So I surround myself with my passion for art. Whenever I'm not doing law, politics, family, it's literally an outlet for me. So I think I've come to the right place. I love the arts.
It's great to hear a mayoral candidate talk about Cimabue already. It's terrific.
Right.
Let me ask you how your love of these things sort of informs your identity as a politician and someone who's working on public issues. How do those things, what's the connective tissue there for you?
Well, I think the connective tissue is that I can't imagine a world without art. I just can't imagine a world without art. So anything I do has got art involved in it, whether it's opera, ballet, or you know, our museums, our fine art museums. And I have always been involved in the arts in San Francisco, and it's probably because I went to school in Florence for so long.
San Francisco, as you know, has one of its important identities. It's its diversity of its arts, from the large institutions to the mid-sized to the cultural districts and the cultural community centers. How, in a sort of broad terms, do you see the arts being supported in San Francisco? What's important?
Well, let me just say, getting back into the mayor's race and learning about the incredible defunding of the arts has been a conversation in many places that I've gone. When I was president of the Board of Supervisors, the hotel tax was specifically for the arts. And as I understand it from all over the city, so much of the arts have been defunded from that particular hotel tax. I mean, from the artists out at Bayview Hunters Point to literally the street artists that were part of the legislation I did to allow the street artists, to the opera, ballet, fine arts museums. I'm really surprised at the amount of defunding that has occurred, and I thank God for our private patrons who can at least, not at least, but contribute to keep us going, at least in a San Francisco fashion. We are an art city. And the problem is when you have elected officials that don't understand that, then you're not going to get the needed funding for the smallest of the arts to the largest of the arts.
We're going to circle back to the hotel tax in a minute because, as you know, there's a proposal about that. But let me ask you sort of more broadly, in sort of these tough and divisive economic times when issues about housing and the homeless and all these other contending issues, how, in sort of in general terms, can we support and nurture the arts in this difficult time?
See, I believe the arts are part of a civilized society. So I don't think that, and because there is so much, I don't think that because there is so much homelessness, of which I am overly familiar with, which is why I'm in this mayor's race, because there's so much poverty, because there's so much drug abuse. In my opinion, that's all the more reason why we need more art, and more public art, and more of an escape for art, and more of an opportunity for everyone in San Francisco, from the poorest of the kids to the oldest of the kids, have an opportunity to go to our free museums, to go to the opera and the ballet. These are ways of experiencing life, no matter what situation you are in life. So, you know, we worked with the Fine Arts Museums years ago to have a day for the homeless to visit our museums. And it was a fascinating day. So you can't ignore the arts. The whole world around you can be in chaos, but you can never, in my opinion, ignore the arts.
So it's not, I guess the question, it's not a zero-sum game, is that if you take something away from here, it means you can't supply it somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely not. You can get funding for arts from many different sectors that you couldn't get for funding for any of the other issues.
For people who are maybe not so arts-oriented, what's the case really for the arts and why they're so important to San Francisco in sort of in broader terms, in terms of attracting visitors and those sorts of things? What's the real case for why the arts are so important here?
I immediately started smiling because in my case it's mental health. It's literal, I'm sorry, but that's, you know.
That's a strong case. That's a strong case.
If I
and
want,
not just your mental health.
I'm not kidding. I'll go to my Fruffalipalipi books just for an hour of, you know, it's uplifting. It's uplifting. And for our city, San Francisco's an iconic city. We are in a horrible situation right now with homelessness and this very serious shooting up of horrible drugs that could kill you all over our streets, okay? So it's really horrible. But we are an iconic city because we have fostered, in my opinion, everything from model cities in the 60s and 70s to the promotion of the fine arts and, you know, opera and ballet. That's who we are. And the minute you start taking away from those essential elements of what the great city is about, that's when you really start to lose your soul. And that's what's happening with so many poor people in our streets. And so in my opinion, when things are as bad as they are right now, that's when you have to pile on more of the arts and more of the opportunity for everybody to see and understand the arts and actually to have that escape, if indeed it's an escape as a passion, as it is for me.
Now, another issue that we haven't talked about on the other side is the cost of housing, which of course artists are famously not big earners.
Right.
I mean, those in Hollywood are, but they're the great exception. How do we, again, try to support artists living here and making this the iconic art city
Right.
that it is? They have to find some way to get a purchase on the cost of living here.
Yeah, well, you know something, I absolutely believe that there is nothing you can't do when you have the political willpower to do it. I just simply believe that. I mean, if you look at some of our former mayors, you'll see that things got done even in the hardest of times. From my dad, you know, Joe Alioto, to Mayor Moscone. I mean, these were things that were very, very important to them too. For that matter, Mayor Shelley, I mean, when things were flourishing. But the housing issue, Steve, I have to tell you, is without a doubt one of the toughest issues right now. What the city and county of San Francisco is calling affordable housing is $130,000 salary a year. That's not teachers, nurses, artists, you know, educators of all types, emergency services in an earthquake city, police, fire. That's not what they get paid. And so there's a program that I absolutely love, which is similar to what we did in Bayview Hunters Point when we had the artist colony that you might recall that is no longer there. A lot of it has moved to Oakland and to the East Bay. But what we did to promote the arts was to give rent subsidies for artists. That's number one. Another one is a program that I really want to copy that's in San Jose. And that is 4 blocks from a hospital, they built a building of over 415 units specifically for nurses. Just nurses. And the rent was a percentage of your income. So the rent never changed. If you made $200,000 or $180,000 as a nurse, and then another person in the same building made $40,000 or $50,000, the percentage, 10, 15, 20% of your income was the same, so everybody could live there. Okay, so like an artist co-op.
I was going to say, can we do the same for artists?
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. I not only can, but that's absolutely something I would do. I was really dismayed to see so many of our artists south of Market had been moved out, and so many at Bayview Hunters Point had moved out. And North Beach used to be full of artists and artist studios, and you know, it's disappearing.
Yeah.
Everything from dance schools to singing to instruments. San Francisco, you know, was the home of every major instrument in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, from the accordion to the violin. And so we've lost a lot of that, and I think it would be really important to bring it back.
You raised it first. You mentioned the hotel tax fund, which has
Right.
been central and a real model around the country. It's languished in recent years. The funding level has gone down, and the historic linking of the hotel tax specifically to the arts has
Right.
languished also.
Right.
Supervisors Peskin and Tang have a proposed ballot measure in November that would restore that and restore the funding level to $16.3 million to start,
Right.
with some increases. Are you in favor of that proposal?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would be more in favor of a percentage of the hotel tax. In other words, a percentage instead of a number, because when we have great season, it's more than 16 million. And we rarely have truly bad seasons until now because of, when you have national and international newspapers calling our incredible city a slum, which is what happened with the New York Times 3 weeks ago, that's when you know this is a critical election. This is an election where you have to have a mayor who has the willpower and the motivation to make San Francisco be what it is, what it's always been, and not the concept of calling San Francisco a slum was devastating to someone like me, absolutely devastating. And when you have a slum, you don't have tourists. When you don't have tourists, you're not going to have the hotel tax. So we have to do something about it, obviously for the humanitarian reasons first, but also for the social reasons and for the economy of San Francisco. When I hear tourists say they won't come back, it's heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, well, it's not just tourists from afar. Also, people come in from Walnut Creek and they, have to run a sort of gauntlet here. We're here in Civic Center now, where major and smaller arts organizations are really struggling with that issue. What can be done to sort of bring the arts organizations into that conversation about the way that sort of street life and civic life needs to improve here in order for there to be a sort of a rich economy at all levels, not just
a renaissance. Yeah, you bring up the topic that I talk about all over, and that's coalitions. There are no coalitions. The tech industry is a bubble, government's a bubble, and the neighborhoods are a bubble. And sometimes the neighborhoods and the government sometimes coalesce. However, getting into the tech bubble, making people come to the table on issues of drug abuse and homelessness and issues that the traffic. To get from my home on Pacific to 2nd Street this morning took over an hour. It was totally ridiculous. You have to bring all the parties together, and the arts should be involved in that party because the arts have customers or patrons from all over Northern California. People come down for the opera, the symphony, the ballet, from all over. And so they have to be considered in the conversation of how are we going to take care of the crisis of traffic and dirty streets.
Right.
The traffic issue, let me just say, Uber, Lyft, and Chariot, 60,000 cars a day. Okay, that's pretty stunning. They came to town. They don't pay any business tax. They're doing business in San Francisco, and they double park all the time. So I have suggested every other block have a white zone where you meet your Uber. You don't meet your Uber in the middle of the block. The Uber gets off the street, so it's not blocking, okay? That would be one suggestion. Of course, another suggestion is to have as many people as possible take public transportation, which of course they're really encouraging. But your kind of patrons drive into town, and they should be involved in the traffic and the congestion issue at the table at City Hall with the tech industries that bring in 10,000 people per building. They all have to be at the same table. I did that with homelessness. I had people at the same table who hated each other. The Coalition on Homelessness, the Hotel Council, the Restaurants Association, the Archdiocese. I had everybody there that had an opinion about homelessness. And it took 6 months, and by the time we ended it, they were all friends, and we came up with a plan with Mayor Gavin Newsom that absolutely took the chronically homeless off the streets for 10 years.
We have talked about one other aspect of this before we move on to the schools, and that is the ways in which the arts, one of the arguments for the arts is that they bring money into the economy. It's not just people coming to the opera, they're eating in the restaurants, they're parking garages, all of that. Is that a case that it's important for a mayor to make about the importance of the arts, not just that they're enriching and enlarging us and making us the iconic city, but they're an important engine in the economy as well?
I hate to go past not just that they're the arts, because for me, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? I mean, they're not just the arts. Okay, you're absolutely right. It reminds me of when I went to China to get a panda. I went to China to get a panda because pandas bring $70 million a year to the zoo. Okay,
It's not just that they're cute.
It's not just that they're adorable and cute. Yeah, right. It's an economic issue. Having said that, the arts is clearly an economic issue for everything from restaurants to just about everything in the city. So, yeah, of course, there's the financial analysis of what they bring to the city.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that's an argument that the mayor really has to continue to make and sort of?
Absolutely.
Again, circling back to the idea that there's so many other issues on the plate for the next mayor or anybody in city government, that the danger of the arts sort of being way back on the train somewhere. It's important for the mayor to keep the arts.
Absolutely.
Important.
It's inconceivable to me, though, that they're way back. If they're way back at the end of the train, then whoever is saying that or treating it that way doesn't understand the city we are. Oh. I mean, it's literally the soul of the city.
Let's turn and talk about schools. As you know, the arts in the schools, in the public schools, has withered over the years.
Right.
And it's not just that that's a shame because of the arts themselves, but studies show that students fare better in math and science and writing and other disciplines if there's art in the curriculum and if it's integrated. What can you do, what can a mayor do to help foster and nurture and support the arts in the public schools here?
Well, as you know, the jurisdictions are different. The school district is, okay, everybody needs to understand that initially because you also can't interfere. On the other hand, a mayor who is a great advocate can do just about anything to improve a student's life in San Francisco. And the arts and sports are absolutely something that a mayor of San Francisco can do. Let me give you an example. When I was president of the Board of Supervisors, I took in front of my colleagues the issue of bifurcating a budget from the general fund budget, bifurcating a children's fund budget for preschool and after-school programs that were both sports and music, dance, theater. And to today, that children's budget exists. And I had to go to the ballot to get it passed. Because at the time, nobody wanted to do anything that involved children. I created the Youth Commission. I couldn't get that passed at the board, so I went to the ballot, and the citizens passed it with 78%. So these issues that concern the school issues, the school kids and the school issues, absolutely can be affected positively by a mayor. In fact, we, the government, the mayor's office, can create those programs outside of the curriculum. We could, give the school what it needs to do after school or before school, or for that matter, during their PE time. PE could be art versus sports, but definitely
finding ways that don't interfere with the unified,
curriculum,
their own curriculum, and their issues. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's circle back and ask about your experience. Did you have, when you were a kid growing up, did you have arts in the schools, and did you have experiences that were formative for you?
Well, certainly going to school in Florence didn't hurt. But since I was a little kid, my mother was an artist. My mother was literally a Renaissance artist, and she gave it up to be married and have 6 kids. But I was surrounded by her art. And of course, my father played the violin every night. And of course, we had to attend. It was mandatory attendance at the opera and the symphony and the ballet. So I met greats. I met Nureyev, I met Fontaine, and I have a funny story about that, but I'll tell you that off the record. And I will never forget ever. I was just a kid seeing Nureyev fly across the stage in one leap. I'll never forget it. It's like, unbelievable feeling. So I grew up in the arts. My mother was constant with the arts, and of course my father with the violin and opera. And there was one time I was in the hospital having one of my children, and my grandmother was in the room above me, but nobody wanted to tell me she was in the hospital because they didn't want me to get anxious. And I could hear her opera, because my grandfather Alioto knew every opera by heart. So my father came in one day and I said, it's the funniest thing. The person above me is listening to Mama Alioto's operas. And it was Mama Alioto.
That's a great story.
So I grew up with that. Every Sunday was opera all day long.
We forget sometimes as adults that those things that we see as children,
Oh, yes.
you know, a certain thickness grows in us, but those things that happen, which is, I guess, why it's so important that kids have these experiences when they're young, because they, as you say, Nureyev jumps and he goes on jumping in your imagination for the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stunning. I get goosebumps just thinking about that night to today, because it was such an athletic, graceful. I couldn't believe it. But you know, that brings up being able to give these kids that are in our school district the opportunity to see these things, to witness them. We have over 300 children in our school system that are homeless. That is a stunning statistic. That's unconscionable and not acceptable in a civilized society. That's something that needs to be dealt with immediately. They're sleeping in their cars, or they're sleeping in the streets with their mom or their dad, usually an unaccompanied single mother. And that's something that not only needs to be addressed, Steve, but is the easiest to take off the street. Easiest to take off the street, and yet we're not doing it.
Angela Alioto, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
today.
so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.